All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. This is Coffee with the Consultant. Today we're going to talk about the California Industrial Stormwater Permit. Obviously, this is my favorite subject, so thank you guys for joining me. Just to kind of start off, my name is Jason Wunschel. I'm with NES. I've been here for 8 years. I am a qualified industrial stormwater practitioner, or QISP, and trainer of record for the California Industrial General Permit. If you guys have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the chat box. As I kind of go through these subjects, we are going to post some links to different resources, links to the permit, SMARTS database. So if there's anything that you want me to kind of touch on, feel free to use the chat. Otherwise, I'll reserve some time at the end as well. Or if you'd like to reach out to me, here's my email address, jwunschel@nesglobal.net. Feel free to call me as well. So I've been doing stormwater consulting for 8 years. I got a lot of experience and a lot of clients all throughout California. So I've seen, different industries, different regions. Depending on where you are in the state, stormwater can be a very different experience. So what I want to talk about today is just to give you guys kind of a general introduction to stormwater. So I don't know, some of you may already have a permit. Some of you may be wondering, is this something that applies to me? So that's what I want to talk about. So you have a good understanding, and then you can move from here to get a little bit more in-depth knowledge if you need it. So just a quick outline of what we're going to talk about today. First of all, the goals of the permit program. What's the point? Why do we need a permit? What are we trying to protect? Second, who needs a permit? That's always the big question. I get a lot of calls saying, hey, I do this at my facility, or, we've had these pollutants. Do I need to have a stormwater permit in California? And then if you do, how do I apply for it? So it's a pretty straightforward process. There's some documentation that you need ahead of time, which we'll touch on. But how do I apply for a permit? And then what happens when I get my permit? That's obviously the big part. So there's documentation that you need to maintain. There's observations, there's monitoring and sampling that you do throughout the year. So we'll talk about that briefly. And then how I want to end today's discussion is the enforcement side. So once you fall into the permit program, what are the risks? So there's two main types of enforcement. One's from the regulatory agencies, your regional water board. I've even seen some EPA inspectors out there, city, county. These are governmental agencies who are coming to your facility to do an inspection. On the other side of that coin is the non-government organizations, or NGOs. So that's things like law firms, environmental groups. This is the public using the permit language to go after facilities that aren't meeting the requirements. They're putting pollutants out into the stormwater. So that's kind of a general outline of what we're going to talk about today. We've got an hour. So again, I'm going to save time at the end. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to use the chat box. I'll try to address them as we go. Otherwise, again, at the end, we'll do that. So the goals of the Industrial General Permit. Why is this important? First, I'd like to start with a little bit of history. So I don't know how many of you guys have seen videos or photos of the Cuyahoga River fire. That was back in the late 1960s. So back in the day, before the EPA, before Clean Water Act, before you had these permits in place to protect the environment, it was a very different picture. So a lot of areas that had, heavy industrial activities, a lot of times they were based close to the rivers. They used the water as part of their processes, and their waste were discharged out into the rivers, the creeks, the streams, and those would accumulate. So back before there was protections in place, you saw river fires, which kind of blows my mind to think about now. When's the last time that's ever happened? But they were so heavily polluted that the entire river would catch fire. So after that fire in the late 1960s, among some other, environmental accidents, the EPA was created. So in 1970, they created the EPA, and in 1972, they expanded the Clean Water Act to include what we call the NPDES permits, or the National Pollution elimination discharge system. So the point of these permits is to help identify facilities that are contributing pollutants in stormwater that, once you identify that site, what activities are they doing? Is it industrial operations? Do you have storage outside, transfer products? What are those pollutants? And then you got to come up with ways to keep those out of stormwater. So that's kind of the essential function of the permit. Now in California, we were a little ahead of the game. So in 1969, they passed the Porter-Cologne Act, and that essentially created the State Water Resources Control Board and the 9 regional water boards. So it gave some government enforcement ability to, really have some teeth to these permits, because you can't just put out a permit requirement without enforcement. It's just kind of hoping that people comply. You need to have someone there to actually enforce it. So the goal of all of this is to protect the environment. So, I grew up in Northern California. I loved fishing. We went out, we swam in the rivers, the creeks, the lakes. Southern California, and even in Northern California now, things have changed. There are water bodies that you can't fish in anymore, especially Southern California. So the point of these permits is to kind of reverse that trend. We want to see these water bodies come back to have their beneficial use. We want to be able to fish in them, swim in them. California's got a goal within the next 30 or so years to have every water body drinkable quality.
All right, so again, we want to maintain that beneficial use. So protecting our water bodies so we can fish in them, swim in them, have it for generations to come. There is also a recent trend in stormwater world to promote infiltration. So instead of just having all the water leave our property, wash off, and eventually make its way out to the ocean, we want to find ways to capture that water, to put it back into the groundwater, and so we have our reservoirs again. So we have some kind of supply. As we see right now, we're in a drought. So by building infrastructure like that, we can hold on to that water for use later. So that's kind of the whole purpose of the permit program. We want to protect the environment, specifically for water in this one. So the big question, what I get the most calls on is who needs a permit? So first of all, it's based on your business code, your standard industrial classification code or SIC code. So attachment A of the permit, it's got this long list, kind of broken out based on industry, but a list of SIC codes that if you use them, most likely you need to have a permit. So they're considered regulated codes. And that includes a lot of manufacturing, even warehousing. They lump that into manufacturing, transportation facilities. There's a long list. So again, based on your business code. Aside from that, even if your code doesn't pull you in, if you're doing industrial activities that are outdoors or exposed, and that includes even your raw or finished material storage, you may need to have a permit. So if you have any questions on, do I need a permit or not based on what I do, give me a call, shoot me an email, I can walk you through that. Something new that happened in 2020, January, California introduced Senate Bill 205. I get a lot of calls on this one as well. Senate Bill 205 was a way for California to force more facilities into the permit program. Because historically, unless you knew about the permit to go out and apply for it, or if you got inspected by a regulator that said, hey, you're doing this activity, I need you to get a permit. If you didn't know that, a lot of facilities were kind of flying under the radar. And I get a lot of comments when I'm out doing the site inspections like, hey, I've got 10 other neighbors near me who are doing the same exact activity, but I'm the only one with a permit. That's not fair. So what California did was introduce this bill that tied stormwater permits to your business license. So now when you go to renew your business license, if you're using one of those regulated codes, they're going to ask you, do you have permit coverage? And you have to provide proof of coverage in order to renew your license. So that's pulling a lot more businesses into the permit program. So I like to see that because it promotes compliance. It protecting the environment is going to be a team effort. So if you've got so many more facilities flying under the radar who are putting, who knows what out into the streams, it's going to be hard. You need to have that compliance. You got to force these facilities to comply with that permit. So there are 3 types of permits. The main one's called the notice of intent. So that's the full-blown permit. We'll talk about how to apply for that next. There are 2 other kind of exemptions. So facilities that do everything indoors, including all their storage, their transfer activities. I see this a lot with warehouses, even some manufacturing sites. They've moved everything inside or under a canopy. So when it rains, it's not actually exposed to the stormwater. Those facilities can file a no exposure certification, or NEC. It's a very minimal permit, which is really just saying, if I do everything indoors, I don't have to sample, I don't need a stormwater plan. The permit fee is only around $150 a year instead of $1,400 for the full permit. And it keeps you off a lot of radars, which we'll talk about towards the end. With the trend in the industry is to go this route, try to get out of the permit, because when you sample, if you're not meeting the numbers, that's when there's risk. And the other permit option is called the notice of non-applicability, or NONA. So this is for facilities that have a large retention feature like a pond. I've even seen a lot more sites, especially in Southern California, where you don't necessarily have room to install a pond. They've been putting these underground storage vaults, so you can put it underneath your parking lot. And when it rains, all your rainwater goes into that vault and it soaks into the ground. Or if you've got a pond, it either soaks in or evaporates. So essentially you're saying, I don't need a permit. It doesn't apply to me because I don't discharge. Nothing leaves my property. So with that one, you need an engineer to come out and evaluate your site. They have to develop a technical report that you're going to submit to the water board and say, this is why I don't need a permit. And then you're off the radar. There's no fee, there's no sampling, no documentation, as long as you continue to hold that water on site. So again, those are the 3 options. So how do I apply? This is for any of those options, but we're going to kind of highlight the notice of intent, the full-blown permit. So everything is submitted through the SMARTS database. It's a state database that the water boards use to submit all documents, applications, reports throughout the year. If any of you have experience with SMARTS, it's a fun one. I have a lot of troubleshooting experience depending on the time of year, especially when we get close to the annual reports. It starts to crash a lot, it'll lock you out. The help desk stopped answering their phone about 5 years ago. So I heard there's a lot of headaches with it, but overall, I think it's a fantastic idea. And the reason is because before 2015 with the old permit, everything was submitted on paper. So every year they would just receive these mountains of paper from every one of these permitted sites. So there was no transparency. If you wanted to request information about a facility, you had to call them, they had to hunt through papers, wait months, if they were lucky enough to actually find it. So now with SMARTS, everything is available to the public. There's obviously good and bad with that. So, it's nice because there is transparency. I can, with a couple clicks, I can find any facility with a permit. I can see their stormwater plan. I can see their sampling history. So you can imagine where there might be risk with that. And we'll kind of dive into that later on when we talk about lawsuits. So again, it's got its pros and cons. It's nice because it's easy as a facility, as a permitted site, to submit information that way and to find information. But again, there is risk. So first, you're going to designate a legally responsible person. That's kind of the head person who's going to maintain the SMARTS account. They're signing off on your plan. Usually it's someone higher up, like a president, a CEO, someone on a board. Typically, this person has to have, financial control over your program. So they can just say, yep, let's spend that money, do what we need to do. And on the other side, if there's a lawsuit, if there's enforcement actions, that's the primary person they're going to reach out to. So you have to have someone in charge. They're going to create an account. You enter your facility information on there. You develop what's called a stormwater pollution prevention plan, or a SWPPP. This document, it just describes, what do I do on my site? What are my pollutants? how do I keep them out of my stormwater with best management practices? And it's got a monitoring plan. So describing, my observations, when and where to sample, here's the forms I'm going to use, and I'm going to include a site map. So those documents, they're uploaded with your application. You pay the permit fee. Obviously, there's going to be an annual fee. Typically, it's around $1,400. Moving forward, what the water board wants to do is move to more of a tiered system. So depending on the size of your property and how much of it is paved, because obviously if you're a bigger site that's completely paved, when it rains, all that water is flushing off site. Versus, a smaller site or a site that's like a gravel yard where it's going to soak into the ground. So you're less of a risk because you don't discharge as much. So higher risk sites are going to pay more than a lower risk site. And that's probably a couple of years out. They're just now starting to talk about it. So I'm guessing in the next 2 years or so, we'll see that implemented. So once you submit it all, then you get a WDID number, or waste discharge identification number. This essentially is your permit number. It's assigned to your site and it doesn't change owners. So if you get bought by a new company or you change ownership, you need a new permit. It doesn't move with you. It's site specific. So that's how you're going to be identified, is with your WDID. So documentation, now that you're in the permit, the first, again, we talked about the SWPPP. So what am I doing? What are my pollutants? How do I keep them out of my stormwater? Site map. A lot of times the inspectors are going to print this map out, and I want to know so much about your facility just from the map alone. Where are the buildings at? Where are your storage areas, your activity areas, transfer areas? And you're going to use arrows to show when it rains, how does that water flow throughout my site? And ultimately, where does it leave the property? And that's where I'm going to be sampling, where that water, the industrial stormwater, discharges. So there's a lot of information you can get from those two documents. And again, these are on smarts, so anything you put in there is available to the public. So there are some opportunities. If you've got sensitive information, you can upload a redacted version, and you still need to submit the unredacted version to the water board, but it's not going to be publicly available. Next, documentation. So it's the monthly visual observation forms, which we'll talk about next, and a sampling observation form. So when you collect a sample, you got to do an observation. What does it look like? Is there anything abnormal about it? Those you're going to keep in your binder. You're going to get a nice big binder, especially after 5 years, because you need 5 years of records. You're also going to conduct employee training. So every year, you need to have some kind of awareness level training for your staff. It can be 10 minutes, it can be 8 hours, depending on what you feel is necessary and what they've earned. But it's essentially saying, this is what you guys are doing, this is your job task, and this is how you impact stormwater at our site. This is what you can do to help keep it clean. So it's those site-specific practices and policies that they need to know to do their part. They should also know, we've got a permit. This is kind of what it entails. They don't need to be experts in it. They just need some kind of awareness. And then you want to document that training. Again, you do it at least once a year and keep that documentation on site. Every time you sample, you're going to get lab results back from your lab. That it all gets uploaded into smarts as well, but you need to keep copies on site. Every year at the end of the stormwater year, which the stormwater year runs July 1st through the end of June. So in June or sometime in the later half, you'll do an annual review. It's essentially an internal audit. There's going to be information from that you take to draft the annual report that you submit on smarts. Really, it's a compliance checklist. It's about 12 questions. Did I do all my monthly forms? Did I collect all the samples right? Were there any issues? Did I do my evaluation? So that you submit to the water board by July 15th every year. It's all electronic, which means everybody can access your annual report. Again, 5 years of records. It's always my favorite part of site visits is going through the records. You always find something. So monitoring and sampling. This is kind of the most, I'd say, labor intensive part for you guys as the permitted site. Because you actually have to go away from your desk. You got to go out and inspect your drains. You got to go out when it's pouring rain, collect a sample. So the first is a monthly visual observation. So at least once a month on a dry day, you want to walk around your facility and look for anything going into a storm drain or discharging from your property that's not rainwater. So is it a spill? Is it landscape irrigation, condensates? Depending on what it is, it may or may not be allowed. So there are certain things that are authorized or allowed to leave into the storm drain system or off your property line as long as they stay clean. And that's things like irrigation water, condensates. If you got groundwater or natural springs, that's also allowed. Things that are not allowed to discharge into the storm drain or off your property line, wash water, so that's vehicle, pavement washing, building, equipment washing, and spilled chemicals. If you guys handle, the plastic nurdles, the little pieces, that is also heavily regulated in California. So there's a whole set of BMPs that you need for a plastics facility, including, installing filters. But the whole point of the monthly inspection is to just kind of do a checkup. How am I doing? Do you see anything like these photos here? The one on the top right, I took just in a parking lot. So things change over time. Depending on the time of the year, you can get a lot of leaves falling. If you get a nice big windstorm, you get trash blowing in from the streets. So that's why you want to do this check to see, is anything out of the ordinary? Do I need to do some cleaning or replace a filter? Maintain my BMP that I have installed, like this filter basket here. You can't just install it and forget about it. You have to maintain it over time. And next is sampling. That's my favorite part. We have kind of a walkthrough tutorial video of how to collect a stormwater sample. Every facility is going to be different. You're all unique. So you may have a nice, easy stormwater drain that you can pull the grate off, collect your sample there. Some facilities, it's not that simple. They've got sheet flow coming down just a driveway, have to find a way to kind of pull it up and collect that sample. But essentially the purpose of the sample is to collect stormwater. So when it's raining, what is that water quality that's leaving my site? And this is important because unless you actually get inspected by a regulator, they're using your lab results to judge your facility, to judge your performance. So if you are not meeting the numbers with your solids, oil and grease, pH, metals, if you need a sample for that, if you're not meeting the numbers that the permit says you need to be below, you're a higher risk facility, you move up into level 1 or level 2. And again, that's kind of a bullseye because these lists of sites in level 1 and 2, it's all available to the public. So they're getting targeted for site inspections, they're getting targeted for lawsuits. So you have to take sampling seriously. Now, to sample, it's got to be a qualifying storm event. So that means there needs to be at least 2 dry days before it, so 48 hours of no discharge. And then once it starts raining, actually leaves the property, produces a discharge, then you have a 4-hour window to collect your sample. So you have some time to go out there, gather your equipment. If you're using a calibrated pH meter, gives you some time to get that done. Go out, you fill your bottles, cap and tight, do all your paperwork, ship them off to the lab. Usually about a week or 2 later, you get the results back, and that's what you're going to upload into SMARTS database. So you're going to report it to the water board. And then frequency. So this kind of varies. For the standard industrial site with a permit, it's 4 samples a year. So that's 2 in the first half of the year, July through December, 2 more from January to June. Now, if you're in a compliance group, that gets cut in half. So it's 1 in each half. Also, if you've got 4 consecutive samples that are nice and clean, you can apply for a reduction, which also cuts it in half. So there's ways to kind of, reduce that amount, the number of times you sample each year, make it a little easier on you. And it also reflects really positively on what you're doing. It shows, hey, my water's clean. The program that we've implemented is working, and it keeps you, again, off of a lot of radars. So my favorite part, the regulators. So during our last call last month, Natasha was talking about what that process is like when you have a regulator show up to your facility, Depending on the regulation that they're there to enforce, which in California, you got a long list that you need to comply with. So for stormwater, there's different agencies that can come out and inspect you. And sometimes, depending on the agency, they may be there looking for a whole list of things besides stormwater. Typically, it's done by the regional water quality control boards. So the 9 regional boards throughout California, they've got a team, depending on where you are in California, up on the North Coast, their team is 2 people. I met them, they're fantastic. Down in LA, they've got whole units, big teams of people that are out there enforcing different things. So some areas, if you got a higher population density or more industrial activities, you got a bigger team. They are kind of the primary agency that's tasked with doing these inspections, but it can also happen from the State Water Board. They're based obviously in Sacramento near the capital. Cities and counties are doing inspections. I've actually seen more cities kind of step it up and do these inspections. Counties, even Koopas, can come out and look for stormwater. Also heard of some EPA inspectors. That's kind of the big, top of the pyramid coming out to inspect you for this. So what triggers an inspection? I kind of touched on this before, but if you go to level 1 or level 2 based on your samples, you can, you're on this higher risk level, you're on the special list of sites. Depending on the regional board you're in, a lot of them have said that's a guaranteed site inspection because they want to see, what are you doing on site? Why did you go to level 1 and how are you going to correct that? I've also seen some inspectors just show up because they were there to visit your neighbor or someone else in town and they say, hey, I've got some time. I want to stop by just to see what you're doing. Take a look at your activities, get to meet you. As long as everything is nice and clean, they think you're doing a good job. A lot of times they won't come back. So kind of the inspection process, which Natasha went into detail on, but they'll show up. Usually they'll have some kind of kickoff meeting, say, this is why I'm here. A lot of times they'll go through your documentation, so your stormwater binder. Do you have all your records? Is your plan complete? And then they'll do a site walk. So just like when I go out and do inspections, I try to model these after a formal inspection so you're prepared. But we're going to look at your industrial activity areas, look at your drainage areas, talk about your program. What are you doing? So you need to know, you have to have a good understanding of what's in that binder. It can't just be this dusty binder up on a shelf. You have to be familiar with it. I've even heard of some inspectors that don't touch the binder. They just ask you questions. So again, be knowledgeable about your program. And make sure that everyone else in the office knows if you're the contact, they got to come to you. Common findings. So most often what I see are administrative, issues with parts of your stormwater plan being incomplete or missing a record here or there. That's kind of a low-hanging fruit. Otherwise, if there's stains out in the lot, if they see trash or debris blowing around, things like that, mostly housekeeping issues, that's the most common thing that I see. And again, it's very easy for an inspector to find stuff like that, which is why you even want to consider how clean is my parking lot. This isn't an industrial area that I have to sample, but if the inspector, shows up and they're walking past garbage before they even get to meet you, that's a red flag. So, put yourself in their shoes. Remember, they're people too. Don't hurt them, answer the questions they ask. Don't say too much. But again, they're going to know. They've done this. This is their profession. They know what these inspections are like. So if they want to go see a certain area, they're going to see it. Types of enforcement actions. So for stormwater, there is a notice of noncompliance and a notice of violation, or NOV. So noncompliance, that's usually for kind of more the administrative little housekeeping things. Typically, I don't see fines associated with those. It's like, okay, fix this. You got 60 days, send me some pictures and we're good. Notice of violation, that's something a bigger issue. That's things, even on the administrative side, if you don't have a plan in place, if you didn't do your annual report, those they can fine you for. It's a violation of the permit. Or if they see a huge oil spill or something discharging into your drain, again, that's a big issue that's got some enforcement behind it. So most likely they're going to be coming back to visit you. And sometimes sites get visited every year. So again, fines associated with that, we want to avoid that. With smarts, again, their inspection reports, their photos are uploaded, which means everybody has access to it. So you better believe that these third-party groups are looking for stuff like that. And again, smarts, as we just touched on, smarts database, it's a very helpful tool. Again, it increases the visibility for your site. So if you have any of these issues, people are going to notice. And then kind of this topic, it's not most exciting and it's kind of a dreadful subject, but it's extremely important, especially now and moving forward. I've seen such a huge increase in stormwater lawsuits in the last couple of years, around 75% jump in lawsuits, and I only expect to see that increase. Southern California, the regional boards have stepped in and kind of made their rules for the numbers you need to meet in your samples a lot more strict. So not only are those benchmarks being lowered, but if you don't meet the numbers, they're considering it violations. They're assessing $3,000 fines per violation. There's legal action being brought against these sites. And because of smarts, these third-party groups are also using that list to target them for lawsuits. So what that process is like, and I've seen this all over California, so it's not strictly Southern California. I even saw a couple of years back, a law firm went into Salinas and they just pulled the list off of smarts. Who's my top polluters in Salinas? Who's my level 1 and 2s? Who didn't do an annual report? And they sent out blanket letters for notice of intent to sue. So they're going to send you a list of allegations. You have 60 days to respond. My biggest recommendation is to get legal help immediately. Don't just sit on it, think that it's going to disappear. It will not. I've seen a lot of times the allegations aren't correct. So, depending on your documentation, things that you're keeping, it's really easy to kind of fight those things. Sometimes it's not. If you missed a deadline, you missed a deadline. There's nothing you can do about it, even if it was 5 years ago. It may not even been your program. You might have taken it over from somebody, but now you're dealing with it. So that's why even these small little compliance items, they're very important. And that's why all my clients, I send them reminders constantly. Do this observation, submit this report, meet this deadline. It is important. So the outcomes, that can vary. I've seen some lawsuits be completely dismissed. I've seen facilities pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, if they lost. And what can happen is if you lose one of these lawsuits, not only did you have to fix the problem that they were suing you for, but now some of these firms can kind of say, okay, well, the permit says you need 4 samples a year. I want you to sample 10 times and sample for these things. Things way above and beyond what the permit requires. But now because of the legal action, you're pulled into this for who knows how long. It could be years. So we want to avoid lawsuits as much as possible. And lastly, let's touch on some industry trends. So because of lawsuits and because of these rules becoming more strict, especially Southern California, with the TMDLs, the total maximum daily load, that's again, the regional board stepping in and say, if you discharge water to this water body, like the LA River, Santa Ana River, Dominguez Channel, the Bay, the estuaries, these are the numbers you have to meet now, and this is what happens if you don't. That's essentially the TMDL. So it's, again, easier for facilities to go up into level 1 and 2, which means it's easier for them to be targeted for a lawsuit. So what sites are doing, if they can, is moving everything indoors, building canopies so they can apply for the NEC and get out of the permit. They're also, if they can, building retention features. So putting in ponds, putting in vaults so they can apply for the NODA and get out of the permit. I've even seen, unfortunately, a lot of facilities relocating. So either moving away from those impaired water bodies to somewhere else in California or leaving the state entirely. So it's really unfortunate. It makes me very sad to see that, but it is a very prominent trend. And I don't expect that to change, especially with these lawsuits on the rise. And again, we touched on the rise of the TMDL. So it's kind of blossoming right now in Southern California. I expect it to expand throughout the state. And again, with these goals of making the water bodies in California near or actual drinkable quality, you can't just you do that without some level of enforcement. You got to make things stricter for these sites. You got to have enforcement actions if they don't meet the requirements. So whether that's the regulators doing it or the law firms doing it, it's just going to get kind of messy. So again, TMDLs, I expect them to make their way throughout the entire state. So I'm here to help, guys. We have at NES, we have a fantastic stormwater team. We've got several QUISP trainers of record. We offer a couple different programs. So we administer the California Trucking Association's stormwater programs, their compliance group and their non-compliance group. We also have just the NES program. So we've got manufacturing facilities, transportation facilities all over California that we've been helping. Essentially, we're their go-to stormwater consultant. We do annual site inspections, help you with coordinating sample collection, reporting, reminders. My favorite is document review, because that's the easiest place to find these little issues. So that's kind of what we're here to do, is to help you understand stormwater compliance. I know it's not everyone's primary business. So again, that's why I'm here, is to help. We also have the NES Partner Program. It's kind of more of it involved with multiple regulations, so not just stormwater, but everything environmental. Essentially, we will be your go-to environmental consultant with site audits, reports. So aside from the programs that we offer, we can also assist you with developing your stormwater plan. If you just want a site inspection to say, how am I doing? Is there anything glaring that I need to fix? Or responding to an inspection. I get a lot of calls saying, hey, I just got, popped by an inspector and I have all these action items I need to do. I don't know the first thing about stormwater. That's when I come in to help. We help facilities apply for permit. We do training classes on site, formal webinar, little things like this. And kind of the part that I see a lot of issues with, especially when I help a client for the first time, is smarts. Again, smarts is not very intuitive, especially if you're not used to a state database. So just by entering things incorrectly in smarts, there's a lot of red flags that can pop up. So knowing how to use that database is critical. So with my clients, I handle a lot of the data entry, making sure that everything is correct, and then walk you through the part of reviewing and submitting it. Because as the actual site operator, the legally responsible person, you have to submit. We can't do that on your behalf. So again, I'm here to make stormwater make sense, help you build a program, maintain that program over time, and course correct if you need to. The rules in California change, so I want to make sure that you're up to speed on all that. So I hope you had a great time. Again, my name is Jason Wunschel, stormwater team at NES. So if you guys have any questions, now's the time. Feel free to use the chat box. We also have a survey. If you'd like to take a brief survey, we're going to post the link in there as well. Let's see, we do have some questions. Okay, so I see this a lot too. So let's say you're a facility that has an SIC code that's listed in attachment A of the permit. So you're like, do I need a permit? But that doesn't always mean that you need a permit. So for this example, the city inspector came out and said that you do not. So again, that's based on your site-specific operations. So if you're doing everything indoors, if you've got a retention feature, or if you're using a business code that applies to maybe your whole corporation, but the facility itself doesn't do that regulated activity, you don't necessarily need a permit. And that's when you would submit either the no exposure for doing it all indoors, or notice of non-applicability, the NONA. Now, NONA typically is for sites that hold all that water on site, but there's also other options for the NONA, which would be that exact situation. I have a regulated code, but I'm not actually doing the activity here. It's just the code that my company uses, but I don't have that activity on site. Therefore, I do not need a permit. So there are ways to respond to that. And that's obviously a great situation because it keeps you out of this permit program, which again is just getting stricter. All right, any other questions? I'm going to kind of leave this up and running. So if you guys have questions, feel free to ask. Again, here's my contact info. If you want to reach out to me or the stormwater team, that's how you can reach us. And again, thank you all very much. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Hope you kicked off your Friday the right way. It was a pleasure as always. Thank you.
I have a question. Do you have
Oh yeah,
time?
go ahead.
So, I work in Southern California. I work for two companies, one in Irvine and one in Riverside.
Okay.
One of our companies was actually located in Tustin prior to relocating to Riverside. And when we were in Tustin, we actually had to have a stormwater permit. I think it was the NOI, Notice of Intent. I'm not
The full permit.
But now this year around, since the Senate Bill 205 passed, we're trying to renew our business license for the Riverside one, and it's asking us for our WDID number, but it also has a section that says like it does not apply. Um, are we able to use the one from the Tustin location? Because I don't think we updated anything ever since we relocated, but I'm just not sure how to go about that.
That's a fantastic question. I actually get that one a lot. So permits do not move with you. So if you change locations, the old permit needs to be closed out. That's done through a notice of termination on smarts. You're going to say, these are the dates that we closed. Depending on your regional boards, they'll ask for photos showing, here's my emptied industrial area. We don't have tanks here anymore. All my materials are removed. And then you close out the old permit. Now, the new location, if you're using the same business code, if you're doing the same activities and they're actually exposed. So again, it's site specific if you need a permit. If that new site needs coverage, then you have to apply for a brand new permit at that location.
Okay.
So it's convenient because you already have an account on Smarts, but it's completely different site. So you need a new plan, a new map, and a new permit. Now, if the new location, if you don't do the activity that you used to, or if it's all done indoors now, you may not need the notice of intent. You can most likely apply for a no exposure or say this does not apply to me with the NONA.
Okay.
So that's kind of what they're asking for. So when you do your business license renewal, again, if you need a permit, you're gonna give them your WDID number, or if you have the NEC or a NONA, you have a specific number assigned to that as well.
Okay, but I'm in the situation where the only WDID number we have is the one from Tustin, and I inherited this department.
Okay.
There was a lot of layoffs and stuff, so I'm fairly new to this department and this entire thing in general. But
Welcome.
if we're able to, if we're asked for the WDID, if I'm able to just add the Tustin one, would is that like a red flag? Would they check that number and come back to me like, hey, this is not for this?
Yeah, they are going to check it. So if the new facility, if that needs a permit, they need to apply for it. And I can walk you through that process if you want to reach out to me separately. We can go through that and kind of orient you to the permit program. But if it's an old location, you can't use that number anymore.
Okay,
Just
so
give you some time because this is still relatively new. So a lot of the cities and counties, and they don't give you a whole lot of resources. They just say, hey, you need a stormwater permit. Some sites are like, what is that? So again, they give you an extension for that. So you have some time to develop it. It's a pretty quick process to apply for a permit. But again, give me a call or shoot me an email and I can walk you through that as well.
got it. Yeah, I'll probably give you a call because I have way more questions.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
I'm happy to help. This is my favorite subject, if you couldn't tell.
this is my most a hair-ripping subject right now. It's just
I hear it a lot.
yeah, and then I'm trying to do something to, better our water quality that we have that I know sometimes goes out into the storm drain because we're in Irvine we're a aerospace facility, like we process sheet metals and we grind down metals as well.
Okay.
And we have some of the mold outside, and I have multiple times told this to our operations manager that, can't have it like that, especially when it rains, because when it rains, I start seeing, things that in my view is not okay.
Yeah.
But they always come at me with, well, the city came out, inspected us, and told us, no, we don't need this. So I'm just like, okay, well, okay,
Yeah. And again, that's always going to be site specific. So I'd like to talk to you and get kind of the details, but
got it.
it's not always down to the cities to say yes or no, you need a permit. If you don't have one and you do need one, they can say, yeah, apply for one. But really, it comes down to your regional board. They're the ultimate authority of if you need a permit or not. And in Southern California, especially Irvine area, your inspectors are pretty strict.
Yeah,
So a lot of times, especially if you're using a regulated code, it's up to them and their perception of your site, whether they pull you in or not. So I wouldn't be surprised if a regional board inspector wanted you to have a permit, especially if you say you've got materials outside. And if there's anything obvious discharging into your storm drains, that's an easy target for them to say, yes, you need to apply for a permit. And a lot of times the inspectors will come out during storms so they can actually see what's coming off your site.
yeah, okay. Well, I'll reach out to you via email. Maybe we can set up a meeting and then we can discuss some consultation options. And then
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Reach out.
all right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Jason.
Yeah,
And Jason, I have a question too, if you have a few minutes.
absolutely.
So my question is, I got the notification from Smarts that they were going to start assessing a fee based on your acreage that was exposed to stormwater runoff. So when I look in Smarts, our acreage that's exposed is the total acreage of our site. So it's close to like 100 acres. However, most of our processes are inside and we just have a few yards of loading docks and like outdoor chemical storage tanks. So I wanted
Yes.
to adjust the area to meet the actual smaller area of just the outdoor storage areas, which I think is correct. That would drop us to like 3 acres from like 100 acres. Um,
Yeah.
and
Big
I submit,
difference.
yeah, big difference. And so I submitted it in Smarts and I uploaded the stormwater pollution and prevention plan and the calculations for the new areage based on Google Maps, which I think is somewhat accurate. And I
Okay.
got a rejection that I need to have a signed copy of the acreage calculations and the plan. And I'm just confused that if you put it into Smarts and you're certifying it, so you're signing it, does that now count as your signed copy or do I need to physically sign the actual paperwork? What's the
They want
holdup here?
they want both. So the process that you did is exactly right. And I've seen this as soon as that notice went out, Smarts got flooded with facilities logging in and trying to change that number. So a lot of the regional boards have been pushing back saying, I need some kind of documentation. So exactly what you did, showing this is the measurement, it's not my whole property that's industrial. A lot of it's parking lots or, buildings, but this is the areas that are actually exposed. So you have that measurement and then they just want you to sign it. So have a statement in there saying this is the real number. This is why I'm changing it. Here's my signature. And then your plan itself also needs to be signed by your legally responsible person. So there's
Okay.
going to be a certification statement in there, has to be signed. And then when you submit it to Smarts, you're certifying it there as well.
Okay. I think I just didn't sign the area calculation because there's
Yeah,
a
and you've
signed
got
area
most of that work.
calculation.
Most of
Okay.
the work is done. You did the
Yeah.
calculation, you got the documents, you just got to sign them.
Okay.
And that's
Sweet.
probably a regional, more of, their preference. I haven't seen every region ask for signatures like that, but your SWIP itself definitely needs to be signed.
Okay. All right. I'll sign the calculations. Thank you. We'll see if that fixes it. Yeah.
But you're on the right track.
Yep.
And yeah, and
Thanks.
anybody else that's got a permit, again, with that new tiered system for the fee, log into Smarts and make sure the numbers that you put in for your property size or acreage and the percent that's exposed, that's referring just to your industrial activity areas that are exposed. So actually outdoors and uncovered. It doesn't apply to parking areas, empty fields, even driveways. But if you've got, this is my industrial storage area, this is my transfer area, I've even seen sites that do some level of repairs outdoors. That is exposed. So that's the number that you want to reflect accurately in there. So again, if you're changing it now, have some kind of calculation, Google Earth or go out and walk your site and say, really it's 300 square feet. It's not my entire property, but here's the calculation, sign it, and then submit that on Smarts. And that's done through the change of information request. It's part of your Smarts permit. It's a whole tab. You can't just log in and change any number you want. Some of those things are locked. So you have to go through a formal process, and then it's going to get reviewed and approved. So again, your regional boards can always kick that back if they need a little bit more explanation. Any other questions? Burning questions? All right. Well, again, you guys have my email address, my phone number. Feel free to reach out. If you can, please complete the survey. Let us know how we did. It was a pleasure. I really like these Coffee with a Consultant. It's a good chance to just, get a general overview of something that you may not know before. So stormwater may be a surprise, but not everybody knows about it. And it's not just a California thing. Every state's got some version, whether you're following the federal program or if your state has kind of stepped in and said, I want to go above and beyond, which California obviously has, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, they've all got their different types of permit programs. So the rules aren't the same across the board, but the intention is we want to protect water quality. All right.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you guys. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jason.
Stay safe.
Thank
You too.